Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Is your husband joining as well?
I would expect.
Great.
I'm upstairs and he's downstairs. Otherwise, we get bad feedback.
Hmm. Make sure everything is. Phil.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you? How's Sherry?
Good. She's got to go see some doctors and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Michael.
Rabbi.
Hello. Are you participating in this, Ari? Don't you have Minion?
Yeah, I mean, this is 7:05, so I'll be on certainly for the beginning, and then I'll have to check out, and then I'll see if I can check back in.
All right, you don't have to. I mean, I'm happy to have you. I'm not trying to dissuade you, God forbid. We'll see who comes.
Yeah.
Well, still a few minutes early.
Yeah.
Whoever comes, comes. Whoever doesn't. It's fine.
So the in-person davening, where does that start?
For Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or
Yeah, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur.
where it's going to start, we're going to do an abbreviated Pesukei Zimra.
Oh, so it starts there. Okay.
Rabbi Shmuel. And yeah, it'll be every section of the service will be included, just abbreviated, most of them.
But only every third word, Myra. So it works well that way.
That would have been a unique approach.
Nelson Cantor has entered the room.
Ah, fantastic.
Oh, who goes out? Really? Yeah, for the parents, right?
Marlene has entered the room. Rachel is
Hello.
connecting. I can't see you.
That's okay.
Yeah, Michael.
Want to be seen?
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Same. No, you just space out and play games. She does much more intense playing.
A woman week.
Let's give it another minute or two.
Nelson Cantor came this morning too.
I read him.
She's growing in a way that you're not growing. I challenge that.
Non-participants.
We're up to 9.
Come on.
You want to keep it to help you take a bath?
So welcome everyone. We're going to start in a moment. I'm not able to mute everybody for some reason, but
Whoa.
What?
You can mute yourselves. I mean, try to log in so I can mute everyone. Give me a moment. There we go. Okay. Great. Wow. Nice to see everybody here. Already great turnout. And I have a hunch a few more people will join. This is a really fantastic opportunity to learn from someone who, for me, is a Baal Tefillah. I don't mean that in the sense he's a beautiful voice, but not in the melodious sense, but someone who's really put in tremendous amount of thought and energy into the mastery of prayer, from all angles, from spiritual, from liturgical, halachic, historical. And Rabbi Balinsky is, for me, a real Baal Tefillah, a master of prayer. Rabbi Balinsky, for those of you who don't know him, was a Hillel director for over 20 years, many of those at Northwestern Hillel in Evanston. He then was the executive vice president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, a position he retired from last spring. And also, he was the founder of the Evanston Orthodox Minyan, a minyan that's close to my heart. It's where I grew up and where I learned tefillah and where I learned many leadership and just what it takes to run a shul and to put people together and inspire them in Yiddishkeit and in Torah learning. I learned a tremendous amount over many years from Rabbi Balinsky, from the age of 6 until still today, still learning from him. So it's a zchut for me, and it's good for all of us to have him teaching the shiur. And it would be great to learn about tefillah and what tefillah is, and the tefillot of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur anytime, but especially this year, where many of us will be davening not with the kehillah, but will be davening at home. And it's really doubly important to understand what we're saying, what it is, what the structure is, what's essential, what can be perhaps, is a little less essential, and how to approach it, how to approach this massive amount of liturgy that's before us. And even those of us who will be davening in shul, I think it's still very useful because davening will be different. We'll be lacking some of the normal melodies and things that would normally carry us through the liturgy. So I think having a deep understanding of the power and the majesty of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davening is very helpful. And there can be no better guide to help guide our community through that than Rabbi Balinsky. So thank you, Rabbi Balinsky, for doing this, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ravari. You read what I wrote you to say for the introduction very well. That's a joke. No, I appreciate the words. That's very kind. So some of you I can't see. I don't know if some of you want to put your cameras on if you can. If not, you certainly have that option, but fine. So just the first a couple of, excuse me. First, a couple of ground rules. One is many of you are on mute, many of you are not. I don't care if you're on mute or not, as long as there isn't background noise. But I certainly am happy to have people come off mute at any time to ask a question, make a comment. There's 15 of us, so it's not a huge group. And so that would be more than fine for you to make a comment, ask a question, etc. We actually have 2 sessions scheduled for Rosh Hashanah, both tonight and September 13th, which is next Sunday night. So we'll see how far we get. And we'll take that from there. Tonight, I want to begin a little bit more with an overview type piece, as well as deal with some broader ideas, and then we can also begin to get into the details of the nitty-gritty. So, but before we begin, you were requested to have a machzor. Do people have a machzor with them? I will assume that's a yes. All right, good. For those of you who have the cameras on, thank you, because we will be referring to the machzor. And again, as we go through questions, comments, I really welcome your participation. I'm not interested in lecturing. And this is a new experience with Zoom, of course, for everyone new the past period of months. But again, feel free to participate and interject. So let's begin. Well, I'll begin this way. I da 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 da. I da 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 da. I da 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 da. I da 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 da. I da 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 da. All right, people know what that is? Sound familiar to anyone? Okay, what is it? What does it remind you of? No one's yet willing to respond. Okay, it's the beginning of the nusach, the davening for Myra on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So you would be going, I die, 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 die. And then the chazan, the person leading, would go, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach, and everyone would respond, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach, Le'olam Va'ed. All right, now what's that, and that would be the normal, and that would, would happen. And then there's its own nusach, its own musical approach, specifically for Myra, like all the liturgy on Rosh Hashanah, like liturgy in general. Liturgy has different nusach, different singing formulations, depending on the year. So there, in fact, when I was during Smicha, when I was in rabbinical school at Yeshiva University at the time, I think it still does, I'm not sure. It had a cantorial training institute. I think it later was called the Bells Cantorial Training Institute. We called it CTI. It was run by a fellow, Macy Nolman, who later published a book. And it was, from one hand, made absolutely no sense. When I was in Smicha, you had to take supplementary rabbinic courses, like one on drashot, sermons, and those types of things. But you could take 2 1-hour-a-week cantorial training courses, which would equal 1 supplementary rabbinic course. What made it sort of funny is that there were high school kids in the class, college students in the class, smicha students in the class. Anyway, but one of the things that one learned there, aside from the most important course I took there, which was Seder service and shofar blowing, that's where I learned how to blow a shofar. But one of the things, and the points of it, was, aside from teaching laning skills, was knowing the nusach, knowing the tune formulations for the Yomim Tovim, for the different holidays, whether it's a weekday, whether it was Shabbat, whether it's a Yantif, or whether it's the high holidays. And all of those play and continue to play a real critical dimension for us. So when we begin with Rosh Hashanah, or even those who go to Slichot, the Slichot, as when we start, at least 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, Sfardim, of course, the real Eidot Mizrach start in Rosh Chodesh Elul. But we often have it. We do make a big deal of it, as we should. The Saturday night, generally before Rosh Hashanah, assuming Rosh Hashanah is at least on a Thursday. So when we do that, normally the person who's leading Slichot, we want to get people in the mood. So, and Slichot would begin with Ashrei, and then there'd be a Chatzi Kaddish, a half Kaddish. And usually the person leading would go, Yivgadam, V'yitgadash shemei Adonai. And continue with that tune, which is the tune we use for Chatzi Kaddish before Musaf, but on Rosh Hashanah. But when you hear it, you know you're in the time of the year. You know that you're experiencing now the beginnings of this time period. And so one of the great challenges we face for those, and I'm focusing on those who will be davening at home. Those who will be davening at shul face the challenge of not being able to sing. The medical committee has permitted people to hum, but has not permitted people to sing for very good reason. But we know that part of what sets the stage for us for high holidays and for the davening in shul is precisely, it's not only the words, which is part of it, the content, which is critical, but it's also the music, the tunes, and it puts us, it carries us, creates for us a certain frame of mind of how we're supposed to begin to have those feelings of sort of the fear and tremblings of coming into this period of Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, of this period of Yom Hadin, of judgment, and the like. Now, the challenge for us, of course, one aspect of the challenge is all the good stuff with the music is stuff that's said in shul. All right, one of the challenges we have is that if we don't know the tunes ourselves, I know a bit of it obviously, but if we don't know the tunes ourselves and aren't fully versed in it, we lack something that what being in shul can provide, which is precisely the music setting the tone, the music setting the stage. And even if we don't fully understand the words and the like, but we know there's a certain feelings that it creates and that we have. But again, just as I started off with whether the beginning leading into Baruch or the tune for Chatzi Kaddish, which we recite before Musaf, we don't recite those if we're home individually. As individuals, we don't recite that. There is no Baruch in the evening prayer in Ma'ariv. There is no calling to prayer because that requires a minyan. That requires the proper prayer quorum. And so sort of the opportunity to set the stage, to put us in the place for davening, it becomes a challenge for us insofar as we don't have we're not going to be saying at home the liturgy with which some of those tunes are normally associated. So that, as such, is that is challenge number one. Challenge number two, which we have to recognize and be honest about, even though services in whatever shul, tent, wherever those people will be attending services with groups of people will be, it's obviously going to be much quicker this year. Some people say a 2-hour limit. Some people say, that suddenly stretches into 2.5 and whatever. But a second level of the experience of davening with a community, and davening particularly in a familiar space with familiar people in a community, is that the community carries you, right? Even if, depending on how much you're into davening or not, but the community carries you. You're not it's not all focused on you, but you're part of this broader community that's participating together, close beside each other. This year, a little more distant in the davening, and that presents, of course, a much greater challenge for those of us who will be davening as individuals at home. All right, there's no one to carry us. Now, it may be if people are alone, for sure there's no one to carry you physically there. People who may have friends or a spouse at home or some kids, they can perhaps carry a bit as well. but it is certainly different than functioning within the sense of the community. And so that presents a second challenge that we have to be very, honest about. Because davening is obviously much more than reciting the words of the liturgy. Davening anytime, but particularly for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, is really being in a certain frame of mind. Yes, I don't, with a liturgy for sure, but it's being in a certain frame of mind, developing a certain sense of consciousness that has to be cultivated now, or even more so self-cultivated, rather than having what has become this year, in a certain sense, a luxury, of having others to help us carry us along. And so that is another element of these very real challenges, and not insurmountable challenges, but simple realities and challenges that we will face. Number three, and this is less concerned with the services, and I think people understand this, is to create, and probably all of us do already, but within normally the context of Yontif, we have Yontif in two places. We have it what we do in preparations at home, and we have it what we do when we gather in shul or whatever davening place we would normally be. Now it has to be done, for those of us who won't be going to shul, it has to be done fully at home. Now, hopefully, I think we are hopefully already doing this and aware, is that during this time, we have to make sure that for Shabbat, we have to make sure the house is special for Shabbat, but even perhaps more so for Rosh Hashanah, that we really have to cultivate what we do with the house in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. That involves in terms of meals, in terms of food, what one is able to cook and prepare. Thank God there's lots of places you can also order from this year as well. But to remind ourselves that we have to do this additional sense to make both every Shabbat special, but particularly to make Rosh Hashanah special. We're going to have a separate session on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur, we don't have to worry about food for now. But for Rosh Hashanah, making sure that one has proper meals, tables properly set, making sure one does what one needs to do to really cultivate in the house a sense of Yontif, a real sense of Yontif, a real sense of the holiday. Again, even though I don't go anywhere on Shabbat, I'm staying home, but every Shabbat, I wear my white shirt, which I would normally wear during, pre-COVID. I don't dress differently in the house on Shabbat during COVID than I did pre-COVID. And I think the same thing should be true for Rosh Hashanah as well. If you're the type of person who wears a suit on Rosh Hashanah to shul, you know what? Wear a suit at home for part of Rosh Hashanah. Feel that the day is that you're acting during the day as something special, even if you're not going to be in the place to which you are normally going to be. Okay, those are some of the challenges. Before we even get to the liturgy itself, those are some of the challenges that we face. When we get to the, aesthetically almost, but when we get to the liturgy itself, then we face another challenge, and that is, and I sort of hinted to it, but that is the key tefillot, the key prayers that we love about Rosh Hashanah, all right? The key tefillot that we anticipate with Rosh Hashanah. Virtually all of them are recited in a shul setting, not in an individual setting. All right, in an individual setting, and we'll look at it, in an individual setting, the basic structure of the service is what we normally do. But we have Psukei de Zimra, the introductory psalms, and we'll look at this in actual detail later on. We have the Shema and its blessings. We have the Amidah. We have Musaf, etc. But what we lack when we're not able to be in shul, what we lack are those real highlights that make for us Rosh Hashanah. And you think you know them, right? I'm less concerned with the short piyutim in the beginning of the Amidah that people mumble through. I'm not talking about the mumble stuff, which is important, but many people often mumble through it. But I'm talking about, things like Le'el Oref Din, recited in Shacharit and then sometimes in Musaf on the second day, right? Le'el Oref Din, and the tune, da 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 da. Da 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 da, badin, da 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 da, and of course Unasana Tokef, okay, with its multi-tunes, and V'Rosh Hashanah Yikasevun, right, and everything that conjures up for us. Those tefillot, of course, are absent. Now, we'll talk about a strategy one can do as an individual at home. And one, certainly one wants to do them, one can, but one at home would not do them in their normal place. At home, if one would choose to recite them, and again, we'll look at a machzor and go in detail later, but if one were to choose to recite them, you would not recite them in their normal place. You would be reciting them as stand-alone tefillot, as stand-alone prayers, piyutim, poems, whatever term you want to use for them. And so while certainly the words for them and the tunes and the fear and trembling that they might evoke for people, but they become add-ons rather than an integral part of the davening. All right, again, that's one of the challenges. And I mean, one of the things that people have to think about is, what do they want to add on to their individual davening at home that can really help with Rosh Hashanah? Now, to that end, and in terms of decisions that people will make, but that other element of Rosh Hashanah that I've emphasized so far, the nusach, the musical tunes, some people, can know them, some basic, they may not be able to lead services, but they can, they get in their minds, you have some of the basic tunes that you can probably play out. But there is a wealth of material now. The one advantage of COVID happening now, or the one reality of it happening now, is Zoom and the internet. There is an enormous amount in the internet available to prepare you for the tunes, for the nusach, the tunes of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There are various sites, I'll mention a couple, but you just do a search, you'll find them. Eli Kranzler, who's the chazan in Riverdale at the Beit, has a recording out. You can find it on Facebook or just Google it, in which he goes through the tunes associated with Musaf. Again, many of them are the pieces, not all, many of them are the pieces done within a shul context, but ones which one could take on and add to one's individual davening. Josh Fagelson, who many of you know, Rabbi Fagelson was a member of Skokie Valley, did a number of years ago on his own personal blog website, which you can find, went through the highlights of davening as well. And they're there, so one can begin to listen and think, gee, am I willing to give myself permission to be able to sing at home, or sing alone, or with your spouse, or maybe a kid who's there? Am I willing to give my permission to myself to be able to spend a little time learning those tunes and to sing, again, to evoke the consciousness of Rosh Hashanah? And also Rabbi Haskell Lookstein on the Ramaz website has whole nusach, the whole way, the tunes associated with davening, so that there are places that one can go to familiarize yourself with it. And that's, again, part of the real challenge this year, is that to take a Gemara quote out of context, if you're going to be davening at home, then one has to have a conscious of davar zeh talui bi. This thing, this davening, this Rosh Hashanah I'm going to create really depends on me. And to do that does require some work. And I think it's positive work. I think it's important work. But we're not able to be passive. We really have the responsibility. To be active participants in this. Okay. Any questions or comments? That's what I sort of wanted to do, somewhat introduction-wise. Any questions or comments? If you have, you must unmute.
Hi, I had to go through this 2 years ago because I came down with shingles right before Rosh Hashanah, and the doctor said, don't go infect everybody in shul. So it's amazing how you can't remember the melodies. I didn't know that some of the prayers you can't say in order. It was very hard to do. I sort of had to just force myself. And one way I did, and you're probably going to tell me I wasn't supposed to be able to do it, it's not halachic, is to say the prayers all out loud, because it's harder to say the prayers all out loud. And I did them in Hebrew, and then I read them in English. I was never able to keep up with the whole thing in shul, to say the whole Hebrew thing and then read the English thing. So at least this way, I knew what I was saying.
Yeah, I first of all, I want to say, one, is good for you, and I really mean that. Second of all, that's what I'm talking about, facing up to the challenge, all right? I'm not worried now about the technical stuff, what you can say or can't say. Well, there's a link to, even in the announcement of this class, there's a link that lays it out, and we'll review some of it, but there's a link on the announcement to the something that was sent out about the class. There's a link that lays it out and has all the pages in the Birnbaum Machzer, in the Koren Machzer, and in the Art Scroll Machzer. So that, one is able to follow, and it describes it very well. And it's a chart put together by our colleagues, rabbinic colleagues in Los Angeles, and they did a great job. But I want to exactly support what you said. If I heard you correctly, you said it out louder in Hebrew than in English. I mean, great. If got that right, then what you did was create that opportunity in a difficult situation to find your way to be able to do the liturgy. And that's critical. That's wonderful. And that's exactly the type of challenge that those of us, and I'm one of those that won't be going to shul, that's exactly the type of challenge we have. Anyone else? Okay, what I'd like to do then, is frame something for you, again, from a section that we can't do, but you can certainly read it during Rosh Hashanah, but it's just not officially chanted during Rosh Hashanah, though it certainly can be read. And that is, I want to look at the Haftorah for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. If you have Machzors, it's the Haftarah for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. In the Art Scroll, it's on 416. If anyone has a Birnbaum, if you can just let me know the place. Or a Koren, if you want to just announce the page. Myra, you have a Koren. Can you announce the page?
As soon as I find it.
Okay, the Haftarah for the first day.
It's on 476, 477.
Okay, in the Koran, in the Birnbaum, I'm not sure, and in the Art Scroll, it's on 416. Okay, does everyone have it? I just want to make sure. Everyone have it? If I don't hear no, I'm going to assume yes. Now, why do I want to look at this Haftorah? Because I think this Haftorah, I think, sets a very interesting model for us. The Haftorah is about it's about the birth of Samuel, but it's really about Hannah. The heroine, the hero of this Haftorah is Hannah, who becomes Samuel's mother. And one of the questions is, why do we read this Haftorah on Rosh Hashanah? Well, one answer is because God remembers Hannah. It ties in with these themes of remembrances, which are part of the second special Rosh Hashanah element of Musaf. But I think, and certainly for our purposes, it is also much deeper than that. And although, again, we read the Haftorah B'tzibur, we read the Haftorah in Shul, there's nothing wrong with reading it at home as an individual. You would just not recite the blessings before and after. That requires the Shul setting. But what's important about the Haftorah for Hannah is this Haftorah is really about, and one of the most important biblical models of someone who prays. All right, Hannah is an example of someone who prays, who the Gemara and the Talmud in the 5th chapter of Brachot uses Hannah as the model to derive a series of halachot, a series of laws related to prayer. But more than just Hannah providing, a series of laws relating to prayer, is that she also offers for us a bit of a sense of what does it mean, in a broad sense, but what does it mean for an individual to pray? And hopefully can help us a little bit get into that space of what it means we as individuals, we can be thinking about as Rosh Hashanah. Because the Haftarah, we'll see, is going to describe the prayers of Hannah. There's two prayers that are going to be described. Both of those which are described is Hannah praying alone. There is not a sense of Hannah praying in shul. This is Hannah praying alone. And she becomes very much the model of a very important prayer type of personality. Now, Hannah is married. I don't need to read the whole Haftorah. She is married to Elkanah. He goes up to the temple to Shiloh. There's no temple yet. He goes up to the Shiloh where the sanctuary is in Shiloh. This is before Samuel's the prophet associated with David. So this is before Solomon, and the temple is actually built in Jerusalem. But there is the Mishkan, the sanctuary is housed in Shiloh. It is a time in the land of Israel in which the high priest Eli seems to be a good man, although a little clueless at one point, but seems to be a good man. His two sons, who are also in charge, are corrupt. And so Hannah is, and this will have an impact, but Hannah is approaching a place where Shiloh, where this prayer is going to take place, which is very much a place that is, on one hand, the Mishkan, the sanctuary. On the other hand, it has also unfortunately fallen into bad leadership. Now, Elkanah has a wife, Penina, who gives him many children. Hannah is his wife as well, perhaps his favorite. But Hashem Sagar Rahma, God has closed her womb. It doesn't tell us why. It's just that she is unable to bear children. This certainly echoes stories in Genesis with Hagar and Sarah, with Rebecca and Leah with Jacob. So it's not an accident that this Haftarah is read also on the first day when we read about the story of Sarah and Sarah and Hagar, and the casting out of Yishmael, and what does it mean of wanting to have a chosen son, and how there's lots of themes that play itself out. Elkanah is a little bit clueless because Hannah can't have kids, and so in the 8th verse, I don't know how yours are. You don't really have numbers necessarily. But the paragraph that begins to be on the day, I'm reading from the Art Scroll, Elkanah would bring offerings. He would give portions to Penina, his wife, and all his sons and daughter. But Hannah, he'd give the best portion. Hannah would be, perhaps by Penina, or rival would make her miserable. And this would happen year in and year out. Elkanah would say to her then, Hannah, why are you crying? He thinks he has the solution. Why do you not eat? Why are you brokenhearted? Am I not better to you than 10 children? So Elkanah is a devoted husband, and he wants to treat Hannah correctly. But he says, what are you crying about? You don't have a kid. Am I not better to you than 10 children? And the correct answer to that is no, Elkanah. You are not better to me than 10 children. So Hannah wants to have a child. And then the story continues. Vatakam Hannah. Hannah went up after eating in Shiloh and after drinking. I'll just read the English. And Eli the Kohen was sitting on his chair near the doorpost of Heichal Hashem, near the doorpost of the sanctuary of the Mishkan in Shiloh, right? And the Mishkan contained the ark. It contained the ark with the luchot, with the tablets and the broken tablets. And then in Hebrew it says, V'hi marat nefesh. She was really embittered. Hannah was in crisis. Every year she was going through this, and she didn't have a child yet. She was very bitter. Vatipalel al Hashem, and our English translates it as she prayed to God. Ubachot tifke, and she wept continuously. It's very interesting. The Talmud in the 5th chapter of Brachot, the rabbis read it that she was so bitter, but titpalel al Hashem, that she prayed against God. She was really angry with God because of her bitterness. So here you have this, Hannah is this individual, and we see her, and this is what we're reading in the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah. We're reading about someone who is the model of prayer, and who is, again, praying here as an individual out of first glance, seemingly, out of her own individual needs. We'll see there might be another understanding of that. And she's crying. Now, it doesn't tell us what she prayed specifically, except for one part, which is the next verse. And it says, Vatidor neder, she made a vow. And she said, God, if you take note, if you see the suffering, okay, of your maidservant, and seeing and suffering was a theme earlier on in the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah. We don't have time to get into that now. Uzichartani, and you remember me, take note of me, which is also one of the themes of the 2nd paragraph of Musaf. And you don't forget your maidservant. And then if you give me a male son, I will give him to you, God, all the days of his life, and a razor will not come upon his head. Okay, as if what Hannah is saying, God, if you give me a son, Hannah says, I'm going to immediately give him back to you. All right? Now, after a couple of years, I'm going to give him back to you. And he's going to be a special son devoted to God. All right? He's going to be a special son devoted to God. The Hayan, it was, Kihir Batali Hitpalel Lifnei Hashem, that she was continuing to increase her prayer before God. The Eli Shomer Piha, and Eli, the priest, he was observing her. Chana hi midaberet al liba. Chana was speaking from the heart. Rak siftateha na'ot v'kola lo yashmiya. All right? Her lips moved, but they didn't hear her voice. And vayachshaveha Eli liskora. And Eli, the priest who's seeing this, misreads the situation completely. He thinks she's drunk. Okay? He thinks she's drunk. Now, it's interesting from this verse that how Hannah was praying, all right, that she moved her lips, but her voice wasn't heard. This creates a model for reciting the Amidah. This is what the rabbis say in Brachot. This creates a model for reciting the Amidah, that when it's recited individually, although I do want to say, if you're davening as an individual at home with no one else around you, I wouldn't worry if you say it out loud, if you choose to do that. But here, certainly the rabbis understood that when the Amidah would be recited, generally individually and also in a public setting, you would move your lips, you articulate the words, but you don't really say it out loud. As opposed to Shema, when you recite the Shema, you're supposed to say the Shema out loud. So you can actually a little bit hear yourself saying it. The Amidah, no. The Amidah, no. But where do they derive this and where they learn it from is they learn it from Chana. They learn it from Chana. Okay? And Chana says, don't worry, I'm not drunk. And she explains that she's troubled, etc. And Eli, gets it. He says, go in peace. Eli gets it, etc. All right, there's other complexities to Chana's prayer that are very creative that the Talmud talks about. I won't go into the details now, but they see that the prayer itself is, they understand, is more than it's more than just reciting the words. Yes, she makes a vow. There's words recited, but there also is this sense in which she's increasing her prayer. There's this bitterness of heart. It's coming out from her guts. It's coming out from her kishkas. It's coming out from her inner being. All right, it's not just reciting the words, but it's really emerging very much so from her inner being. So that's prayer number one of Chana, which is, I think, an important model for us. As whatever we decide of how much the davening we are able to do from the machzor individually, the model of Chana, though, is that to really strive, to really have a sense of depth in which the words themselves, the meanings, and your own personal understandings are coming from your kishkas, all right? That it's not about only reciting the liturgy, which is important, but it's much more than that. It's what's going on inside you. What are you envisioning? What do you want? What are you envisioning for yourselves at this time of the year, both as individuals and maybe also, we'll see, broader as a community? Well, the Haftarah continues. Samuel is born, and then she comes back to the temple, to the Mishkan, to the sanctuary, brings the child to Eli, and she says, I'm the woman who was standing before you a few years ago with this request. This is the child for which I prayed. And then it says, in the second part of the Haftorah, some of you may have it formatted differently. In the second part of Torah, you have the second prayer of Chana. And here, I'm just going to read the prayer a little bit. It's a very interesting prayer. Chana prays not only that she should have a son, but after she brings him to Eli, that Eli should now look after him, she prays a second time. And here and it's interesting, what is she praying for? Chana prayed and said, and I'll just read the English translation from Art Scroll for now. My heart exulted in God. My prize was raised through God. My mouth opened wide against my antagonist, for I rejoiced in your salvation. There is none as holy as God. There is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Do not abound in speaking arrogance upon arrogance. Let not haughtiness come from your mouth. For God is the God of thoughts, and deeds are counted by him. The bow of the mighty is broken, while the foundering, those who are weaker, are girded with strength. The sated are hired out for bread, while the hungry ones cease to be so. While the barren woman bears 7, the one with many children becomes bereft. God brings death and gives life, lowers to the pit and elevates. God impoverishes and makes rich. He humbles and God exalts. He raises the needy from the dust. From the trash heap, God lifts the destitute. To seat the destitute with nobles and make them inherit a seat of honor. For God are the pillars of the earth, and upon them God sets the world. He guards the feet of his devout ones, but the wicked are stilled in darkness. For not through strength do human beings prevail. O God, may those that contend with him be shattered. Against each of them let the heavens thunder. May God judge to the end of the earth. May God give power to his king and raise the pride of his anointed. And that's the end of the prayer of Hannah. Now, I just want to mention a few things. Considering the fact that Hannah gives this prayer when she brings Eli, the child for which she had prayed and longed for, this prayer barely mentions a child. There's one line about 7, someone having 7, getting 7 children. A barren woman gets 7 children. But the rest of it is really about God and about a certain vision of society where the haughty will be brought low and the low will be brought high. And again, this is an individual prayer of Hannah, but it's an individual prayer that is also has within it a certain kind, I think one can say a certain kind of vision. I just want to read you a couple of paragraphs from a book, Tanakh Companion to Samuel, to a little bit from an article by David Silber, who's a wonderful teacher. And he asked the question, and the verse, God will judge the ends of the earth and God will give strength to his king. There's no kingship in Israel yet when Hannah says this. All right, there's no kings in Israel yet. And so David asks, what in the world does this have to do with the fact that God kind of answered prayers for a baby? What's this notion that she's praying that there be a righteous king? And so David suggests as follows. It appears that the story of Hannah is not simply about a woman who wants to have a child. Actually, Hannah wants something else. As I see it, what Hannah really wants is to change the world. Her prayer, this second prayer, is the clue. It's not a prayer for a baby, it's about something very different. Hannah's message is that God is the true king. God's will is that the powerful and haughty should not oppress those who are impoverished and weak. People graced with power should not abuse it. Hannah prays for a kingdom on earth which reflects the heavenly kingdom. What Hannah is calling for is explicit in the reference to Malkot, to God's king. It is actually a request for kingship, but a kingship that reflects the true kingship of God. All right? And so David continues, that is why I read this on Rosh Hashanah. The basic theme of Rosh Hashanah is God's kingship. The Haftarah reminds us that our job here on earth is to reflect the kingship on earth. Hannah's prayer for God to give strength to his king is a direct rebuke to the present rulers who are not reflecting God's kingship. Who were the rulers at the book of Samuel? They're Eli's sons, Hophni and Pinchas, who are described as Belial. They're worthless. All right? And Hannah is not, although Hannah's individual, always praying as an individual, David suggests her prayer is not just for herself. Hannah walks into Shiloh and sees that it's run. Yes, Eli, the prayer is, the priest is there, but his 2 sons who are corrupt are running it. Hannah walks into Shiloh and she sees something very wrong with the place. This is not a proper temple. God's footstool here on earth does not reflect Hannah's values. There's a stink of corruption that pervades from the last days of the book of Judges, which is the previous book, that also infects the priest as well. She prays to God to remove this impediment and instead place a true king who reflects the true value of God. Okay? And one more line. As a woman, Hannah is powerless. Women have no power in the book of Samuel or any other place in Tanakh either. Not completely, but David adds, but they see clearly. All right? Now, I mention this because part of perhaps what's being, in looking at this Haftorah, which we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, is a model for us to think about, even as we will be reciting the liturgy. It's a model for us to think about, what should we be praying for? What does it mean we're going to be praying as individuals? So on one hand, we want to pray for some of our own deepest wishes, like Hannah did. Hannah lacked a child. She was praying for a child. Okay? All of us face certain things we lack. God willing, we have lots to be thankful for, but all of us also face certain things that we lack on Rosh Hashanah, certain things we may lack about ourselves, certain things we may want for others who we are close to, who we love, and we want to pray for them. And Hannah is that individual, and it's not actually, we read a Rosh Hashanah, it's that individual who is racked by prayer. She understands the need for prayer, and is willing to, really devote herself to it. So that's element number one in terms of our own individual davening on Rosh Hashanah, keeping in mind this sense of understanding what are our real needs about which we want to daven for on Rosh Hashanah. That's number one. Number two, the second element of Hannah, particularly as it relates to her second prayer. All right? The second prayer of Hannah is not so much about Hannah's individual needs or thanking God that she got a son. It's that Hannah also understands that there has to be a vision for what we want the world to be, or in her particular case, what she wants, her world to be. All right? Hannah sees the corruption that is out there and understands that there must be a change, and she is willing to be the mother of the son and give up the child. All right? After the child's weaned, she brings Shmuel to Eli. She brings Samuel to Eli. She's willing to give up her child with the hope that the child will be able to create a different model, restore a different model, not a model of corrupt leadership, but a model of a leadership that is holy, and a leadership that is making the right decisions and doing things not in a corrupt way, but in a positive way. And so that I think is also a second element of, even as we pray as individuals on Rosh Hashanah, is that there is both this inner focus, which is important, and I really think one should think about what does one really want to pray for in Rosh Hashanah from one's own inner point of view, and to do that exercise, to really think about that as we approach Rosh Hashanah. And number two, a second element to think about is about what vision do we have beyond our own more immediate needs, however important those are, but also what vision do we have that we want to pray for beyond ourselves, okay? For the society we live in, for, I don't want to go create the world around us, but in other words, what part do we want to pray for ourselves, for outside ourselves? That will be a manifestation of the kingship of God, all right? That will be a manifestation of the kingship of God. Malchiel, as we'll see, kingship is a central theme of Rosh Hashanah. absolutely central. But Malchiot, as the kingship of God, is not enough for us simply to say God is king or God will rule. It's also to have a vision of what we want that to be. And then the challenge is, however we can, to participate in actualizing that vision. And that, I think, is the second, according to David Silber's reading, I think it's a very good reading, is an aspect of the second prayer of Hannah. Yes, she's praying as an individual, but she's also has looked with clear eyes at what is surrounding her, and understands that a form of change is needed as well. And so her prayer is a prayer of vision. It's not so much a prayer, there's thanks in that, but it's not, oh, thank you, God, for giving me a son, now I'm here. But it's also describing a certain vision of how things should ideally be. And one of the ways we can use the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah is precisely to build up that vision of how things, of how do we want things to be, and to be able to use the liturgy to do that, okay? But I chose specifically Hannah as this model because those of us who will not be in shul, our model of the Davener is Hannah this year, all right? Now more than ever, our model of the Davener is Hannah. And that we can really hopefully work and cultivate that element within ourselves as we prepare for the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Any questions or comments on what I just did? Please feel free. Just unmute yourself if you'd like to say something.
Yasher Kol, Michael, that was put us in the right mindset for Yom Tov.
Oh, okay. I give, by the way, and I give credit to a lot of credit to David Silber, not exclusively David, but that second half, I think he reads very well. All right. Now, is Rabbi Hart on the line or not? His picture is, I don't know, he may or may not because he had to go to shul. All right. How long do you want to go till? It's 2 minutes to 8. We have another session scheduled for next week. Do we want to begin to look at the liturgy itself and get to some practical piece? Or do you want to wait till next session and we'll devote next session to the actual liturgy itself? Which do people prefer?
Next session.
Next session?
Yes.
Okay, is that okay with people, next session? Unmute and say yes if you want it to be yes. Okay, I see nodding on the ones who I see on my screen. Okay, so what we'll do next time is as follows. Karen sent out in her announcement about this, it says, click here to download the Rosh Hashanah Tefillah guide. So it was in the announcement that, oh, you can't see my phone. It was in the announcement that Karen sent out. So have that available for next week with the Machzer, and then we'll go into detail about that, and also suggest, the guide is very good. As my father used to say about certain prayer books, it's like they daven themselves, which he understood because he wasn't that much of a davener and that familiar with it, was that it gave you good instructions, all right? And so the chart that you have the link to gives you great instructions. But we'll go through it and point out the key pieces, and also just to think about the decisions you're going to have to make individually. It's easy for me to say, well, you're home, you don't have to worry about COVID in shul, so you can spend 3.5 hours davening individually at home, okay, however long it takes you. That's not going to work for most people, and I don't consider it a pisaron, something lacking people if it doesn't work. So one of the things we'll also discuss next week are some decisions one can make about shortening certain parts of the davening. It's not a lot, but there are places one can. And also some of the decisions one can make about adding a couple of the big highlights for davening as well. So that's what we'll do for next Sunday at 7. Also, I do suggest if you're interested in getting, again, for your own individual davening, getting used to some of those tunes, check out the web. There's lots of good stuff there. And I think that element will also help you with your individual davening for Rosh Hashanah, and then eventually for Yom Kippur as well. And one final thing, and we'll stop. Davening, if you're familiar with the Machzor, Hebrew's great. If you're familiar with the Machzor or don't understand every word, a good Machzor has a good English as well. I think the Birnbaum English is a little weak in places. The Art Scroll is more literal, and the Koran is also, the Koran is excellent. So I don't want to preclude English as an option for people as well. Obviously, if you can do Hebrew, but sometimes also doing parts in English or English afterwards was suggested earlier. That also, whatever is, in this case, there's a certain fluidity on some level, whatever is going to work for you. And that preserves this opportunity for a real meaningful davening Rosh Hashanah. So we'll stop here, unless there's anyone else anything to say, and next week we'll go through the nitty-gritty of the liturgy itself. Okay, any other final comments? All right, if not, we'll call it a night. I hope this was helpful. If there's any feedback or comments and you want to stay on, just please feel free to stay on and share with me. More than happy to hear. We live in an unusual time at the moment. All right, thanks guys. I'll stay on for a little bit if anyone wants to stay on and chat.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, hearing nobody, I will sign off. Okay, bye everyone, thank you.